The garage was nearly empty, just me and the sound of an old radio humming in the background. My hands were deep in the guts of a rusty sedan, oil smudging my arms, when I heard the desperate pounding at the door. It wasn't the usual knock of a late-night customer. It was frantic, urgent. I wiped my hands on a rag and went to check. The moment I opened the door, she stumbled in. A woman, breathless, fear etched across her face. Her expensive coat was torn, her hair disheveled, and her hands trembled as she gripped the doorframe. "Please," she gasped, glancing over her shoulder. "You have to help me." Instinct told me something wasn't right. I looked past her into the night, scanning the darkened street. No one. But that kind of fear didn't come from nowhere. I stepped aside, letting her in. "What happened?" She shook her head. "I can't, there's no time." Before I could press for answers, the deep growl of an approaching engine made her flinch. Headlights cut through the dusty glass of the garage, illuminating the space in blinding white. I barely had time to react before the sleek black car screeched to a stop outside. The doors flew open. Shadows moved. And just like that, I knew. Whoever was after her wasn't planning to leave empty-handed. My pulse thundered in my ears. Whoever was in that car wasn't here for a friendly chat. The woman, whoever she was breathing fast, her chest rising and falling in short, panicked gasps. "They found me," she whispered, pressing herself against the workbench. I had two choices: step aside and let these guys take her, or stand my ground. I wasn't a hero. I was just a mechanic, a guy who spent his nights covered in grease, trying to keep my failing garage from falling apart. But something about the fear in her eyes, the way her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the bench, I couldn't ignore it. The car doors slammed shut, and footsteps echoed outside. My hands clenched into fists. "Back room," I ordered, my voice lower than I expected. "Now." She hesitated, but the look on my face must have told her I wasn't messing around. She ducked behind the shelves just as the garage door swung open. 3 men stepped inside. Suits, sharp and expensive. Their kind didn't belong here. One of them, a guy with slicked back hair and a scar running down his cheek, smiled at me like we were old friends. "Evening," he said smoothly. "We're looking for someone." I crossed my arms, leaning against the hood of the car I'd been working on. "Yeah? Well, you came to the wrong place." Scarface chuckled, nodding to one of his guys, who wandered deeper into the garage, scanning the shadows. "You sure about that?" he asked, tilting his head. "A lady. About this tall. Dark hair. Fancy coat. Maybe she ran in here?" I shrugged. "Haven't seen anyone." Scarface sighed, shaking his head. "See, I don't like being lied to." The guy behind him reached into his jacket. My gut tightened. I was way out of my league here. I didn't know who these men were, but I knew enough to recognize trouble when it walked in my door. And I just put myself right in its path. Then, a sound. A scuff of a shoe against the concrete. Scarface's eyes darkened. And just like that, the situation went from bad to much, much worse. The silence stretched tight, a razor's edge waiting to snap. Scarface's gaze flicked toward the back of the garage, his smirk sharpening. He'd heard it too. I had seconds to act. Before his guy could reach for his weapon, I grabbed the nearest thing, a rusty wrench, and hurled it at the overhead light. Glass shattered. Sparks rained down. The garage plunged into flickering darkness. "Get down!" I shouted. I barely saw her move before I lunged. My shoulder crashed into Scarface, knocking him off balance. His goon yanked out a gun, but I swung hard, my fist connecting with his jaw. He staggered back, cursing, but I didn't wait around to see what he'd do next. "Come on." I grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward the side exit. The moment we burst into the alley, cold air slapped my face. Tires screeched behind us. More men, more cars. I had no plan, no idea where we were running to, but stopping wasn't an option. "Who are they?" I demanded as we sprinted down the alley. She didn't answer, just kept running. A gunshot cracked behind us. I swore under my breath, my grip tightening on her hand. If they caught us, we were dead. The sound of their footsteps echoed closer. We needed cover. Fast. That's when I spotted it. an old motorcycle leaning against the back of a diner. "Can you ride?" I asked, already yanking the tarp off. She shook her head, wide-eyed. "Then hold on tight." I kicked the engine to life just as the first set of headlights swung into the alley. The roar of the bike drowned out everything else as we tore into the night, the city blurring past. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know what I'd just thrown myself into. All I knew was that there was no turning back now. The wind howled past us as I gunned the throttle, weaving through empty streets, my heart pounding like a war drum. The girl clung to me, her fingers digging into my jacket. Behind us, headlights cut through the night. They were still chasing us. I swerved onto a side street, barely missing a dumpster. "You want to tell me what's going on?" I yelled over the roar of the engine. She hesitated, her grip tightening. "They'll kill you if I do." I let out a bitter laugh. "Lady, I think they're already planning on it." Another gunshot rang out, pinging off a street sign near my head. I cursed under my breath and veered hard to the left, sending us down an overpass ramp. The tires screeched as we skidded onto the freeway. For a split second, I thought we'd lost them. Then, more headlights. More cars. They weren't letting her go. I needed a way out, and I needed it fast. That's when I spotted an old construction site up ahead, fenced off with a "road closed" sign. Perfect. I gunned it. "Hold on." We hit the curb hard, the bike nearly bucking us off as I forced it through the narrow gap in the fence. Behind us, brakes squealed. The first car didn't make the turn in time. It slammed into the barrier with a crunch of metal and shattered glass. But the others? They weren't stopping. I swerved between rusted machinery and stacks of cinder blocks, my heart hammering. The girl buried her face against my back, barely breathing. We had seconds before they caught up. I spotted a narrow service tunnel on the far side of the site. If we made it through there, we could disappear into the city's maze of backstreets. I pushed the engine harder, dirt kicking up behind us. We shot into the tunnel just as another gunshot rang out. Sparks flew as the bullet ricocheted off the steel beams overhead. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. We tore through the other side, finally hitting the empty streets beyond. Silence. No more cars. No more gunfire. For now, at least we were safe. I pulled the bike into a hidden alleyway, killed the engine, and turned to her. "All right," I panted. "You're gonna tell me who you are and why guys with guns are trying to kill you." She hesitated. Then, finally, "My name is Elena Carter," she whispered. The name rang a bell. I frowned. "Carter? As in?" Before I could finish, the distant growl of an approaching engine made my blood run cold. They weren't done hunting us yet. The roar of an approaching engine echoed off the narrow alley walls, rumbling closer with every heartbeat. I met Elena's eyes, and I saw pure, unfiltered fear. It wasn't the fear of someone who'd been running from a bad decision. It was the kind of fear you saw in someone fighting for their life. "Come on," I whispered, pulling her deeper into the shadows. We crouched behind a stack of old crates, the night pressing around us. The black sedan rolled into view, its headlights carving long beams of light across the brick walls. The driver's window rolled down, and I saw a man in a black suit leaning out, eyes scanning the alley. I held my breath, and I felt Elena's fingers clutching at my sleeve. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my own pulse. The man cursed under his breath. "I know you're out here, Elena. You can't run forever." Elena's grip tightened, and she pressed herself closer against the wall. She looked up at me, her lips trembling. "They won't stop," she mouthed. "We need to keep moving." The sedan lingered a moment longer before slowly rolling away, its taillights fading into the distance. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension ease out of my chest. But it was only temporary. I turned to her. "We can't stay out here. You need to tell me everything now." Elena nodded, swallowing hard. "Not here. There's a diner, about 3 blocks from here. It's open all night, and there's people around. We'll be safer there." "Safer how?" I asked. "If those guys come back?" "They won't shoot with witnesses," she insisted. "Please." I hesitated, then nodded. "All right, let's go." We crept out of the alley, sticking to the shadows until we reached a busy main road. The neon lights of the diner glowed like a beacon in the distance, promising warmth and temporary refuge. We slipped inside, and I immediately felt the comforting embrace of warm air and the smell of coffee and grease. The place was mostly empty, save for a tired-looking waitress behind the counter and a couple of truckers nursing cups of coffee in a corner booth. We slid into a booth near the back, and I kept my eyes on the door. I was on edge, waiting for those men to come crashing in any second. Elena's hands were shaking as she reached for the glass of water on the table. She took a sip, her eyes never leaving the window. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice low. "Who were those guys, and what do they want with you?" She set the glass down with a soft clink. "They work for my father." I stared at her. "Your father? You're telling me your dad sent guys with guns after you?" She nodded, her eyes haunted. "He's not exactly the fatherly type." She hesitated, then continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father is Alexander Carter." I felt a chill run down my spine. The name was infamous, one of the most powerful and ruthless businessmen in the country. There were whispers of corruption, rumors of illegal dealings, and worse. "Your dad's the Alexander Carter?" I asked. "The guy who owns half the city?" "Half the city and a good chunk of the underworld, too," she said bitterly. "He's dangerous, and he doesn't like loose ends." I frowned. Why would he see his own daughter as a loose end? Elena swallowed, her gaze dropping to the table. "Because I saw something I wasn't supposed to. I overheard a meeting. He was making a deal with some very dangerous people. Weapons, drugs, money laundering, enough to destroy lives if the truth ever got out. He caught me listening, and now he wants to make sure I never talk." I felt the weight of her words settle over me. "You mean he wants to kill you?" She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I tried to run, but he's always one step ahead. I don't know where else to go." My mind raced. This was way bigger than I'd realized. I was a mechanic, not a bodyguard. But now I'd put myself in the crosshairs by helping her. "All right," I said slowly. "We can't just keep running. We need a plan." Elena looked at me desperately. "I can't do this alone. Please, I need your help." I rubbed a hand over my face. "Okay, first, we need somewhere safe to lay low. I've got a friend who runs a warehouse on the edge of town. It's quiet, out of the way. He owes me a favor." "Are you sure we can trust him?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I trust him with my life," I said. "But we need to move fast." We slipped out of the diner into the cold night, taking side streets and back alleys. The entire time, I felt like a target was painted on my back. Every distant sound had me jumping, adrenaline keeping me on edge. Finally, we reached the warehouse, a massive building surrounded by empty lots. The heavy metal doors creaked as I pushed them open, the darkness swallowing us whole. I found the switch and flicked on the overhead lights. Stacks of crates lined the walls, and the place smelled of oil and dust. "It's not fancy," I said, "but it's safe." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "Thank you. I don't know why you're helping me, but thank you." I shrugged, trying to act casual. "Guess I'm not a fan of watching people get killed." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "You don't even know me." "Maybe not," I admitted. "But I've got a feeling you're worth saving." She opened her mouth to say something, but a sudden noise cut her off. The distant crunch of footsteps on gravel outside the warehouse. My pulse quickened. "Get behind those crates," I hissed, grabbing a heavy wrench from the workbench. Elena ducked out of sight, and I stood ready, every muscle in my body coiled tight. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped right outside the door. A heartbeat later, the door handle rattled, and someone started to push it open. The heavy warehouse door groaned as it shifted, the rusted hinges screeching in protest. I tightened my grip on the wrench, my pulse thudding like a drum. Elena crouched behind a stack of crates, her breathing shallow. I could feel her fear, thick in the air between us. I didn't blame her. If these guys got inside, neither of us were walking out. The door stopped moving. Silence. Then bang. A gunshot shattered the quiet, the bullet slamming into the doorframe inches from my head. I dropped low, cursing under my breath. "Come out, Elena." A voice called from outside, smooth and deadly. "We know you're in there. No point in hiding." I shot a look toward Elena. She shook her head frantically. Another bang. This time, the door shuddered as something heavy hit it from the outside. They were trying to break in. I scanned the warehouse. No back doors. No windows big enough to squeeze through. We were boxed in. We needed a way out. Fast. Elena, I whispered. Is there another way they could get in? She shook her head. Not unless they blow the whole place open. I wouldn't put it past them. Another slam. The metal dented inward. I gritted my teeth. All right, we're not waiting for them to come to us. We need a distraction. Elena swallowed hard. What kind of distraction? I motioned to a row of stacked oil drums against the far wall. Something flammable. Her eyes widened. You're not serious. Dead serious, I muttered. They're going to come in armed, and we can't fight bullets with our bare hands. But if we make them think the whole place is about to go up in flames. She nodded quickly, understanding. I grabbed an old rag and shoved it into the spout of one of the oil drums. My hands shook as I pulled out my lighter. I hadn't had a cigarette in years, but I always carried one, just in case. I flicked the flame to life, my breath catching as I held it close to the rag. Elena, when I say run, we bolt for the side. She nodded. Got it. The door groaned again, this time buckling under the force of whatever battering ram they were using. I inhaled sharply, then dropped the lighter. Whoosh! The rag caught instantly, flames licking hungrily up the side of the oil drum. Thick black smoke curled into the air, filling the space with the acrid scent of burning fuel. Elena, run! We sprinted toward the side of the warehouse just as the door exploded inward. Shouts. Footsteps. Fire. The idiot set the place on fire. The men hesitated, their boots crunching over broken metal and debris. That hesitation was all we needed. I grabbed Elena's wrist and yanked her toward a stack of wooden pallets leading up to the warehouse's steel rafters. Climb, I ordered. She scrambled up, her breath coming in panicked gasps. I followed, the heat from the fire already creeping up my back. Below, the men spread out, weapons raised. Find them, one barked. They couldn't have gone far. We reached the rafters and edged along the narrow beams. The fire spread faster than I expected, licking at the lower walls. Elena, I whispered, we need to get to the skylight. She followed my gaze to the rusted glass panel above us. It was old and grimy, but if we could break through. I edged forward, careful not to slip on the dusty steel beams. Below, the men were shouting. Then, one of them looked up. There, up in the rafters. Bang! A bullet whizzed past my ear, shattering part of the skylight. No choice now, I growled. Move! I leaped for the nearest support beam and hoisted myself onto the steel ledge beneath the skylight. My fingers found the jagged edge of the broken glass, and with a grunt, I slammed my elbow into it, shattering the rest of the pane. Elena, come on. She climbed after me, her movements shaky but determined. The fire below roared, smoke billowing thick and black. Another gunshot. Sparks flew as the bullet ricocheted off the steel. I grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her through the broken skylight onto the warehouse roof. Cold air rushed over us, but we didn't have time to enjoy it. The sound of footsteps pounded below. Our pursuers were trying to reach the rooftop access. Elena, I panted, scanning our surroundings. How good are you at jumping? Her eyes widened. You're kidding. I pointed to the next rooftop, about 10 feet away. It was lower than ours, but still a risky jump. Better than staying here. She nodded, fear flashing in her eyes, but she didn't hesitate. I took 2 steps back, inhaled sharply, then ran. The wind roared in my ears as I launched myself over the gap. My boots hit the gravel-covered roof on the other side, my knees buckling on impact. Elena, jump! She took a deep breath, then sprinted forward. For a second, she was in the air, weightless, caught between survival and disaster. Then, she hit the roof beside me, tumbling forward. I caught her before she rolled off the edge. We lay there for a second, breathing hard. Below, we could hear the men shouting. They're on the next building. No time to waste, I muttered, pulling Elena to her feet. We ran, leaping from rooftop to rooftop. The city sprawled out beneath us like a maze of escape routes. The further we got, the more the shouts faded. Finally, after what felt like forever, we dropped down into a dark alley. Elena bent over, hands on her knees, gasping for air. That was insane. I chuckled breathlessly. Welcome to my world. She looked up at me, her expression softer now. You didn't have to do this. I met her gaze. Yeah, well, guess I don't like seeing people get hunted. A small smile tugged at her lips. But before either of us could say another word, the distant wail of sirens cut through the night. Police. I swore under my breath. We need to disappear. Now. Elena straightened, her expression turning serious again. I know a place. I raised an eyebrow. You sure? She nodded. If we can get there without being seen, we'll be safe. I exhaled. All right. Lead the way. As we melted into the shadows, I realized something. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But one thing was certain. There was no turning back now. Elena led the way through the darkened streets, her breath still shaky from the chase. I kept close behind, my muscles aching from the wild jumps across the rooftops. The sirens were getting louder, echoing between the buildings. We need to move faster, I murmured. I know, she whispered. We're close. We weaved through alleyways, dodging the main roads, avoiding security cameras where we could. She finally stopped in front of an old brownstone building, its brickwork worn but sturdy. It looked abandoned, but she moved with certainty, reaching into her coat and pulling out a key. This place yours? I asked. She nodded. It was my mother's. I didn't have time to ask more questions. The sound of approaching tires made my gut clench. Without a word, she unlocked the door, and we slipped inside. The air inside was musty, like the place hadn't been lived in for years. The furniture was covered with sheets, dust floating in the dim light from the street lamp outside. Elena shut the door behind us, locking it quickly. We should be safe here, she said, but I didn't miss the hesitation in her voice. I walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek outside. The black sedan from before rolled slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping past the house. My heart pounded as it came to a stop right in front. Elena, I said lowly. She froze. No. They. The sedan's doors opened. Two men stepped out, scanning the area. My stomach twisted. We weren't safe. Not even close. Back door? I asked quickly. She nodded, already moving toward the kitchen. We slipped through a narrow hallway, reaching a rusted metal door at the back of the house. Elena fumbled with the lock, her fingers shaking. Bang. The front door shuddered under impact. They know, she whispered. I grabbed her wrist. Forget the lock. We're going. With a hard shove, I forced the door open. We stumbled into a narrow backyard overgrown with weeds and broken concrete. Another bang. This time, the front door gave way. They're inside, I muttered. Move. We sprinted across the yard, vaulting over a low chain-link fence into the alley beyond. A shout erupted behind us. There they are. Gunfire cracked through the night. I grabbed Elena, pulling her low as we ducked behind an old dumpster. Bullets sparked off the brick wall just inches above our heads. Go, go. I pushed her forward, keeping close behind. She led us through the maze of backstreets, her breath coming fast and uneven. My own lungs burned, my legs screaming at me to stop, but stopping wasn't an option. I could hear them behind us, heavy boots pounding against the pavement. Then, up ahead, I spotted something, a sewer grate. Elena here. I grabbed the rusted handle and heaved. It groaned in protest, stuck tight from years of neglect. She crouched beside me, her hands gripping the edges. Together, we yanked, and the grate finally gave way. Inside, I ordered. She didn't hesitate. She slid into the darkness, disappearing into the tunnel below. I followed, pulling the grate back over the hole just as our pursuers rounded the corner. Holding my breath, I pressed myself against the damp stone wall. Where the hell did they go? One of the men growled. They couldn't have just vanished, another snapped. Their footsteps slowed, boots crunching over the debris in the alley. Spread out, a voice ordered. Find them. I stayed still. So did Elena. The air was thick with tension. The only sound the distant dripping of water somewhere deeper in the tunnel. Then, finally, they're not here, one of them muttered. The footsteps retreated. The alley above fell silent. I exhaled slowly, my grip on Elena's wrist finally loosening. That was close, she whispered. Too close, I muttered. I reached into my jacket, pulling out my phone. No signal. No surprise. We need to get out of here, I said, scanning the tunnel. We can't stay underground forever. Elena nodded. I know another way out. It connects to an abandoned train station a few blocks from here. I gave her a look. And you know this because? She hesitated. I used to come here when I was a kid. My mother. She'd bring me here to hide whenever things got bad. I didn't ask what she meant. The pain in her voice said enough. We started moving, our footsteps echoing in the damp tunnel. The air smelled of rust and sewage, but it was better than being shot at. As we walked, I tried to make sense of everything. I'd gone from fixing carburetors to dodging bullets in the span of a few hours. And now, I was stuck underground with the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the city. Why me? I asked suddenly. Out of all the places you could have run to, why my garage? Elena glanced at me. Because you weren't afraid. I let that sink in. Before I could respond, she stopped suddenly. There, she whispered, pointing ahead. The tunnel opened up into a massive underground chamber, the abandoned train station she'd mentioned. Rusted tracks stretched into the darkness, and an old maintenance ladder led up to a service hatch. I motioned for her to stay low as I approached. The hatch had a small, reinforced window, just big enough to peek through. I pressed my face to the glass, and my stomach dropped. 2 men were standing right outside. I ducked back immediately. What? Elena whispered. They're waiting for us, I murmured. Her face paled. How? I shook my head. Maybe they had informants. Maybe they were tracking her some other way. Either way, they were always one step ahead. She clenched her fists. What do we do? I exhaled. We make them think we're somewhere else. I scanned the station. A broken panel dangled from the ceiling near one of the old tracks. If we could make it fall, the noise would distract them long enough for us to slip out another way. I picked up an old metal pipe and handed it to Elena. Hit that panel as hard as you can, then run. She swallowed, nodded, and took position. I moved toward another hatch on the far side of the station. On my signal, she took a deep breath. Now, she swung. The panel came crashing down, sending an ear-splitting clang through the tunnels. Shouts erupted from above. Over there. Elena was already sprinting toward me. I shoved open the second hatch, and we climbed out just as the men stormed into the station. We hit the street running. By the time they realized we weren't in the tunnels anymore, we were long gone. I didn't know where we were heading. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not even close. The freezing night air hit us like a wall as we sprinted down the deserted streets. My heart hammered in my chest, lungs burning from exhaustion, but we couldn't stop. Not yet. Elena ran beside me, her breath sharp and ragged. She wasn't built for this. Not the running, not the hiding, not the life or death chases. But she kept up, her determination outweighing her exhaustion. We ducked into another alley, pressing ourselves against the cold brick wall. I peered around the corner. No sign of them. We had lost them. For now. Elena collapsed onto an overturned crate, running a shaking hand through her tangled hair. I can't do this anymore. I crouched beside her, still scanning the street. We don't have a choice. She looked up at me, something raw in her expression. We can't keep running forever. She was right. They would never stop hunting her. As long as she was alive, she was a threat to her father's empire. A slow, heavy realization settled over me. Running wouldn't save her. We had to end this. Elena, I said, meeting her eyes. If we don't want to spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, we have to take the fight to them. Her lips parted in shock. You're saying? I nodded grimly. We go after your father. We needed a plan. Not just to confront Alexander Carter, but to survive it. Elena knew how her father worked, his routine, his weaknesses, and more importantly, she knew where the evidence was. Everything he's done, she whispered, is documented on a private server in his penthouse. If we can get in, copy the files, he's finished. Easier said than done. Alexander Carter's estate was a fortress. Armed guards, state-of-the-art security, and enough money to make problems disappear. But every system had a flaw. Tomorrow night, Elena said. He's hosting a gala. No guards inside, just businessmen, politicians, and people who don't know who they're dealing with. That was our way in. We found what we needed, a stolen suit, an elegant dress from an old thrift store. We cleaned up, looking nothing like the fugitives we had been the night before. By the time we arrived at the estate, the party was in full swing. The mansion loomed over us, golden lights glowing behind towering windows. Elena's fingers gripped my arm tightly as we stepped inside. The room was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and men who thought they were untouchable. But we weren't here to drink champagne. We moved fast. Elena led me toward the hidden service elevator, its doors opening with a quiet chime. We stepped inside. The doors slid shut. The moment they did, Elena froze. The security camera in the corner blinked red. "Oh no," she whispered. They knew we were here. The elevator screeched to a stop between floors. The lights flickered. Then, a voice. "Elena." The speaker crackled. It was him, Alexander Carter. Her hands clenched into fists. "You really think you can win?" His voice was calm. Too calm. I stepped in front of Elena, shielding her. "We're here to end this," I said. Carter laughed. "You're nothing but a mechanic. You have no idea what game you're playing." A hiss of gas filled the elevator. "Damn it." I grabbed Elena and pried open the doors just enough to see. The elevator shaft stretched below us. The gas was rising fast. "No time. Jump," I ordered. "What?" I grabbed her wrist, and we leaped. We fell hard, crashing onto a maintenance floor. Pain shot through my ribs, but we were alive. An alarm blared. Footsteps pounded toward us. "Come on," I gritted, pulling Elena forward. We burst into the penthouse level, straight into Carter's office. And there he was, standing behind his desk, his suit crisp, his silver hair perfectly combed. Like none of this mattered to him. "You should have stayed in the shadows, Elena," he sighed. "Now, I have no choice." Guards closed in behind us, but we had what we needed. While Carter was monologuing, Elena had already accessed his computer. The files were uploading. His entire empire, every deal, every crime, was about to be exposed. Carter's expression darkened as he saw what was happening. "No," he snarled, reaching for a gun. Bang. Elena had grabbed a fallen guard's weapon. A single shot rang out. Carter staggered, clutching his shoulder. She stepped forward, shaking but determined. "It's over, Dad." Sirens howled outside. Police lights flashed through the windows. Carter's guards hesitated, because now they weren't just facing us. They were facing the law. I grabbed Elena's hand. "Time to go." We sprinted toward the balcony, scaling down the vines just as the police stormed inside. By the time we hit the ground, the city was already watching. Live broadcasts. Breaking news. Alexander Carter was finished. Days passed. Then a week. Carter's empire collapsed overnight. His men turned on him, making deals to save themselves. Elena's evidence exposed everything. The news spread like wildfire. And as for us, we vanished. No one came looking for us. No more black sedans. No more hitmen. Elena and I sat in an old diner, far from the city, watching the TV screen. Carter's mugshot flashed across it. "Guilty." "It's really over," she whispered. I exhaled, running a hand over my face. "Yeah, it is." We sat in silence for a while. Then she looked at me, that mischievous glint finally returning to her eyes. "So, what now?" she asked. I smirked. "Got a car that needs fixing?" She laughed, the sound light and free. For the first time since we met, she wasn't running. And neither was I. Whatever came next, we'd face it together.